Nigeria's consumer inflation now at 18.6% in latest figures released by the National Bureau of Statistics. The Debt Management Office insists Nigeria is not at the risk of a debt distress. World Bank assisted states' financial transparency and sustainability program disburses about 262 billion naira to states as grants in the second tranche of the $750 million financing. This is Business Express on the network service of the NTA, and we are reaching you from Abuja, the nation's capital. I am Musa Abubakar. Let's begin the program with inflation. Latest figures from the National Bureau of Statistics show that headline inflation for June 2022 increased to 18.6% on a year-on-year basis. This was higher by 0.84 percentage points compared to the rate recorded in June 2021, which was 17.75%. This increase was caused by increases in food index attributed to the distribution in the supply of food products, an increase in the cost of transportation arising from higher cost of energy, and increase in import costs due to currency depreciation, as well as a general increase in the cost of production. On a month-on-month basis, the headline inflation rate increased to 1.82% in June 2022, higher than the rate recorded in May, reported at 1.78%. Urban inflation rate rose to 1.82% in June 2022, while rural inflation rate increased to 18.13%. The International Monetary Fund say inflation, debt and forex crisis are pushing the Nigerian economy and other African economies to the brink. Managing Director of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, said ministers of finance and central bank governors on the continent disclosed this to her this week. Georgieva disclosed this in a report titled Facing a Darkening Economic Outlook, How the G20 Can Respond, published on the IMF's website. She added that most countries on the continent could raise money from the global financial markets and do not have large domestic markets to turn to. The Debt Management Office has described as false some media reports saying that Nigeria failed the World Bank disclosure rule on publishing its annual borrowing plans. Clarifying on the subject in a statement, the DMO said there has been no publication by the World Bank accusing Nigeria of failing its disclosure rule. The Debt Office insisted that Nigeria is one country that had imbibed the principle of transparency in public debt. The DMO insisted that Nigeria is not at the risk of a debt distress due to its $15.9 billion Euro bonds. Rather, what the country needed is to generate more revenue significantly beyond the current levels. Just this year, the World Bank mounted its largest crisis response in history with record commitment of $70.8 billion. Inflation is top on the agenda of countries across the world since 2021. However, the global lender posits the war between Ukraine and Russia has made things worse for nearly every country, Nigeria inclusive. Global inflation rate, measured by the Consumer Price Index, rose to 3.42% in 2021 from 1.92% recorded in the previous year, hitting its highest level in 9 years. From the east to the west, Africa, and in fact, the entire globe is reeling from the effects of geopolitical tensions, and the cost of living is increasing by the day. How will this be impacting you and I? I have in the studio Professor John Olatunji Alabi, Dean Faculty of Management Sciences, Kogi State University, Ayigba, and President Chairman in Council Institute of Classic Entrepreneurship Nigeria. Together, we shall be x-raying global inflationary trends and the impact on Africa and particularly Nigeria. You're welcome to Business Express.
Thank you, Bakra, for having me, and good day, Nigerians.
Okay, what is happening with global inflation?
Well, thank you very much. Essentially, inflation is a situation where the monetary value is diminishing, occasioned by the forces of demand and supply. Of course, the price of goods and services are rising generally, and it's not just in Africa, all over. So you find a situation where when the expectations of the currency is not being met because of the rises in prices of commodities is affecting virtually everywhere. But globally, there's this assertion that, oh, it's Russian-Ukraine war. It has started even before that time. Okay. It's very important. So inflation generally, of course, it has reached, like you said in your report, 3.4. all-time high, in the globe, and the reflection is that it's ticking down to sub-Saharan Africa more because of our, dependency on the international economy.
I understand there's also supply chain disruption as well.
Because all over.
Caused by COVID-19.
Before, yes, the COVID-19 was essentially one because there was a lockdown and there was supply chain problems. So that itself precipitated the inflation. After that, of course, we have the issue of climate change and extreme weather that's affecting commodity productivity across the world. That was accentuated by, some protectionist policies of government too. So the causes are down-rooted, but the Ukraine-Russian war triggered off the entire thing. And of course, for strategic reasons of those two countries, for agric and for energy. The largest producer of wheat and energy. So once there is supply lockdown, what will happen is, of course, the demand is still there. So those are the reasons. So it started from the COVID-19 lockdown, the various policies that are coming up. Of course, it moved on to the climate change issue and extreme weather. Then, of course, the protectionist policies of so many governments. Okay. Of course, the issue of insecurity, don't also discount it. Insecurity and conflict over the world is affecting productivity. So all this put together was now fueled by the Russian-Ukraine war, of course, and that is the essential. So those are the fundamental causes of...
Okay. Amid this concern, we have a rise in death and concern about currency depreciation in a good number of countries, Nigeria inclusive. Give us a sense of this.
Yes, amidst all these inflationary issues that are coming up, the issue of debt has become so topical. You know very well that most countries will want to say, oh, we are not in the debt quagmire because they were looking at debt to GDP ratio. That may suffice on paper, but we must know that Nigeria exited the debt quagmire during the way of our administration, that's in the Obasanjo regime.
And the DMO said that we are not in any
but doing above $100 million debt is huge on an economy. And what it brings to you is that we are in a situation where even if our debt to GDP ratio is still within a threshold, the fact that the quantum is high. And what inflation does to you, is to worsen the situation. So we're saying that our debt is not, the ratio to GDP is still within threshold, but the amount involved is high. I want to say that for individuals, for instance, once there's inflation, there's a tendency that you benefit, isn't it? Because it provides you more money, of course, to settle your debts because the value is currency is being devalued by virtue of that, so you can have more money. But on the whole, Nigerian debt situation may be within the threshold, acceptable, but then we must know the fact that we are going. If we don't, by the end of this year, I foresee us moving towards 130, 150 billion debt, and that will be a major thing. I don't envy those who are striving.
But borrowing to invest in infrastructure, I thought is something that...
Borrowing to invest, but look at Nigerian economy. We have a high level of recurrent expenditure.
Yeah.
And most of the time, when we borrow to finance infrastructure, we end up pushing some of them into current expenditure. So what I'm saying is that if you borrow to finance infrastructure and there's self-refinancing and self-payment, that will be a problem. But for this country, the cost of governance is high. We have canvassed severally for that. Let's bring down the cost of governance. The public service have been pruned down by where our ministries are over-bloated. We need to shrink them. The cost of governance, the legislature, for instance, the executive, is rather too large. Okay. You know? So these are the areas. But as long as you spend more of your money on recurring, of course, you're going to have problems.
Okay, when you look at it, some numbers are quite scary.
That's right.
Honestly, when you look at other countries, like Ghana recently is around like 29%, and they are seeking IMF support. But then when you look at Nigeria, it's 18.6%. Is this a cause for alarm?
Well, of the 10 top debt, inflation rate countries, Nigeria is not part of the 10. Maybe you say, congratulations, you want to say? Yes, Venezuela top with 1,198%.
I've seen Sudan with over 300.
Yeah, 300. We have about 3 countries in Africa that has, I think, Sudan 340, this is Zimbabwe 60%, and Ethiopia 33%. Ghana is 29%. And of course, Nigeria is just 18.6. My take is this. See, when you do cross-country comparison, you must also know that our population is high and our resources, because it's also available. But if we don't manage it very well, we're going to have a problem. It may not be that we're not among the top 10, but the fact is that debt should be managed such that we don't have problem. Inflation is killing. Inflation is affecting multi-sectoral aspects of our economy. You can start naming the effects. So many. For instance, the value of Naira is devalued. Today, I was at a place and I saw 590, 600 for euro, and 700 something a dollar. I was just saying, how do you go about this? So the value of Naira is being depreciated. Of course, talk about the issue of cost of living, isn't it? Inflation is pushing up the cost of living. The poor are worse hit because the propensity to consume is high. And once the price go up, it affects them. Of course, talk about the level of poverty in the country, isn't it? It's going up. So there are so many effects. I don't foresee a situation where labor will keep quiet. You see, if we move to what happened in Ghana is just obvious. There are complaints and there are protests. Once the cost of living go beyond, there's a tendency for labor to ask for wage increase. And when you have for wage increase, you know what's going to mean? Wage demand. Of course, that also leads to some social unrest. So what we're saying in the sense is that we must be prepared as a nation to manage this inflation rate. And a situation where you have inflation, the growth is retarded, and you have unemployment. You are moving towards stagflation. So it's important that we manage it very well. Of course, we know that investors also are not encouraged. The spillover effect is that once there is increase in cost, of course, you want to push it, isn't it? Yeah. You move up your production cost, you shift that to prices of commodities, and consumer is further shrinked. So essentially, the multi-sectoral effect of this inflation is high. But government must up its A game to ensure that we nip it at the ball. The poor, you remember also that we were talking about lifting 100 million people out of poverty. That is by the old statistics of saying that we are 160 million. Now that we say we're going to be 260 million, so it means we'll be looking at 150 million people in poverty quagmire.
Should be the new target, right?
That's right. A new target for that, not 100 million. Of course, the 100 million are there in a poverty quagmire. To bring them out will require that. So inflation will further impoverish them. So, and that is what we should do.
Okay, now away from Nigeria, UK inflation rates recently hit 40-year high. UK and US as well. We are talking about 9.1%. The last time it recorded this particular inflation rate was in 1981. What's the explanation for this scenario?
Well, essentially, the general cause of the global inflation that's spinning around had to do with those fundamentals I first mentioned. First and foremost, we have a situation where the economy itself then was being challenged by environmental forces. The issue of climate change and weather is one. The issue of protectionism. You remember the EU and the and all what of you. So that affected the inflation rate. Of course, the issue that came up was the Russian-Ukraine war. But all this together. But for the UK, the position has been that JMK funded that once you have quagmire like this, you spend out of your poverty so that you can get out of it. Of course, inflation itself is not an aberration. I think I must underscore that.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, inflation is not an aberration. Yes, there's a level of inflation required to move the economy forward. In other words, if you don't have a certain level, like in the US, for instance, from 1914 to 2022, they have an average of 3.4% inflation rate, which is necessary. It's a tonic. It's just like an average Nigerian. Abubakar, if you tell me that I check your blood pressure and you're normal, you are 120, 80, I say you are not a true Nigerian. Because the society requires that you must have a level. Because you know what I mean? So I'm saying that inflation is not an aberration. So we have inflation that will propel. Otherwise, you will recede into a deflation.
But at this rate?
At this rate, yes. That's why they're thinking of it. So many issues have to come into play. Now, you start addressing one by one those issues that have to do with, policies, social, economic policies. But one thing stands out. Most nations will use fiscal and use monetary policies. The monetary policy instrument has been interest rate. But I tell you that there is a spiral effect, isn't it? Yes. This is Philip Cobbs that talk about a correlation between inflation and interest rate. They go the same way, isn't it? But it's important that if interest rate goes up, what happens? There is a propensity not to consume but to save. Of course, people cannot borrow. What happens to investors? They are not having. So the entire government is that we must be strategic. Our economic planner must sit at a table and say, yes, it is happening in all over the world. What are we doing about it? And for UK, I think again the acts on impulse and the sporadic actions. You remember the issue of are we to go with EU? Are we not to go with EU?
Okay. Now, what's the way out for Nigeria?
For Nigeria, it's simple. We understand that congratulations, we are not among the top 10. Congratulations, it's just about 18.6%. But the trajectory is that we must manage it vis-a-vis our debt issue. Now, what we need to do is let's address those fundamental issues that are necessary. How to show up the value of the naira? It's important that we start looking towards, encouraging export the more. Number two is that we need to look at our cost of governance. Most of the money we are borrowing that fueling inflation. We are going to an election cycle, isn't it? So what happened at the primaries? A lot of money were pushed out, isn't it? Government should start using those tools of governance that can help reduce money circulation. The simple truth is that once there is inflation, as cost push inflation, that demand inflation, we must address it. The other area is about supply.
Okay.
We must do something about agriculture.
Okay.
We must empower those stakeholders who produce products and encourage exports so can generate revenue. Debt and inflation cannot go together.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor John Olatunji Alabi, Dean Faculty of Management Science, Kogi State University. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure, Nigerians.
Now moving on, the World Bank assisted State Financial Transparency and Sustainability Program Shifters gradually winds down. The federal government says it has so far disbursed about 262 billion naira to states as grants in the second tranche of the $750 million financing. National coordinator of the program, Stephen Okon, stated this at the workshop organized for civil society organizations in Abuja.
Currently, we are also in the process of making more disbursements for the 2020 APA, we call it, and the 2021 APA. So The 2021 APA, which we expect to disburse in October, will be the last of this disbursement. Currently, disbursement is ongoing for 2020 and for 2019 APA.
Now, the German government, alongside World Food Programme and UNICEF, have announced 40 million euros resilience and essential services support in northeast Nigeria. In a joint statement, the organizations said 500,000 conflict-affected people will benefit from a new humanitarian and development package. The initiative is aimed at enhancing peace, increasing livelihood opportunities, and providing education, health, nutrition, child protection, and sanitation support to strengthen the resilience of vulnerable populations in Borno and Yobe states. The multi-year project is designed to leverage ongoing humanitarian support in Bade local government area of Yobe state and Shani local government area of Borno state, while also providing multi-sectorial interventions to address drivers of conflict and fragility. Now, the federal government is working with its agencies, the academia, and the business community to articulate strategies and actionable steps towards ensuring the development of employable skills for job creation. Minister of State for Industry, Trade and Investment, Mariam Katagum, was speaking at the second National Skills Summit in Abuja.
Ensure the development of employable skills to enhance job creation in order to conquer mediocrity and tackle the challenges of poverty and unemployment that is bedeviling our dear nation.
In what ways can we encourage our youth to embrace apprenticeship for employability and entrepreneurship?
One thing to have skill is one thing to be able to run it successfully as a business, and that's where we will come in as an agency.
And now to the capital market. The NGX closed the last trading day of the week on a positive note, picking up from yesterday's losses. The NGX All Share Index closed 52,215.12 basis point, with market capitalization at 28.1 trillion naira. 190 million volume of shares valued at 4.1 billion naira in 3,893 deals exchanged hands on the exchange. Capital Guarantee Trust Company and UBA topped the chart at the end of today's transaction. Now here's a global market update.
United Stocks futures traded mixed Friday as traders awaited the release of more corporate earnings and key economic data. Dow Jones Industrial Average futures gained 79 points or 0.46%. S&P 500 and Nasdaq 100 futures both depreciated by 0.30% and 0.03%. In Asia, the Hang Seng Index in Hong Kong fell 2% as technology stocks declined and mainland China markets dropped more than 1% after the country's GDP missed expectations. The Nikkei 225 of Japan gained 0.54% to close at 26,788.47. European stocks were higher in early trade Friday, pairing some of the week's losses. Germany's DAX advanced 1.26%. Britain's FTSE and CAC 40 of France were also in positive territory despite wildfires that continued to rage out of control in southwestern France. Emerging markets of Africa clinched on to early gains on Friday, supported by gains in consumer goods companies. Morocco, Kenya and Tunisia markets posted gains, while shares in South Africa and Namibia finished negative.
And that's it. This is where we end this episode of the program. Don't forget you can access all previous episodes on YouTube on the NTA's channel. Also be informed that you can communicate with us via our social media handles. Do join us again on Monday at 3 p.m. for another package. I am Musa Abubakar.